Story 1. Read Ezra Klein's new book, Abundance. Sums it up well. There's a tendency for sanctimonious negativity and NIMBY attitudes while monitoring people's language. Story 2. We ignore the problems plaguing the Black community from within and completely sweep them under the rug. I am a Black male. Story 3. My party engages in many false dichotomies when arguing a point. They are pandering to the lowest common denominator, and it makes them appear uninformed. There are more than two sides to just about any argument. Story 4. Why haven't we been hearing more from Robert F. Kennedy Jr. regarding making the food in the grocery store more healthful? Story 5. Their lack of action has allowed Trump and his associates to do whatever they want with little resistance. It is time for them to stand up and show strength. Story 6. The left, which I am on, is too concerned with being offended. Cancel culture is out of control. There are serious issues to be offended about, but when you are offended by everything, those get lost. Story 7. It feels like the Democratic Party has been wounded so badly that it may not recover. I'm not knowledgeable enough about politics to know how to counter Donald Trump and his agenda, and I don't know if any of us are willing to engage with them. Marjorie Taylor Greene is just as hateful as most of that group. Story 8. The fact that Democrats still have no idea how to deal with Trump. He is not Reagan, so stop using the playbook from 1983 and adopt a different strategy. Story 9. People assume that being centrist or independent means you are sitting on the fence when in reality it usually just means, I see some reasonable middle ground between the two extremes of this decision and I would like to offer it as an alternative to fully aligning with either extreme. I am making that choice because I believe it is what's best for us, not because the party I support says I should vote a certain way. Story 10. For a while, I leaned to the right, then became a civilian and moved much more toward the center. I am trying to stay centrist now, but the current situation is pushing me further left. Both political parties have flaws, demonize each other, and show little to no desire to collaborate. That is my biggest concern. If I could make a couple of changes to our government, I would start with term limits and then propose that the second-place presidential candidate becomes the vice president to encourage cooperation between the parties. Story 11. Purity test. Many of us seem more concerned with expressing our beliefs than developing an effective strategy. Story 12. I think the recent book by Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson, Abundance, is a good critique of my party. We are often too concerned with process or create systems that are too complicated or burdensome to achieve the desired outcomes. The failure to build the high-speed rail system in California is a key example of this. Democrats represent my values far better than Republicans, especially nowadays, but there is a real need to reform the overregulation in some key parts of policy. Story 13. There is a significant number of self-proclaimed leftists who act as gatekeepers to the ideology. This is a considerable problem and is notably less prevalent among our ideological counterparts on the right. They tend to accept anyone without asking too many questions, which contributes to the strength of the young white male alt-right pipeline. Story 14. They are a group of cowardly individuals. They should all stand up to Trump and fight him vigorously. Currently, I can count on one hand the number of Congress members who are taking any action. Story 15. Trump ruined it. The idea of a conservative who has a different way to achieve many of the same objectives as Democrats, even if we differ on some issues, is gone. We are now the party of the extreme. Story 16. Both sides can observe the extremes and react emotionally. The vast majority of Republicans are not overly zealous, firearm-obsessed individuals. The vast majority of Democrats are not identity-challenged, inactive individuals seeking handouts. Story 17. I am not affiliated with any party. I am a registered independent and will never vote for a Republican. The Republican Party elected a fascist as president and consists of individuals pandering to the wealthy. The Democratic Party has failed to act effectively. They should not have supported Biden in either election, and they operate within an echo chamber, proving ineffective against a bullying administration. Story 18. They play too nice. We compromised with Republicans when they introduced the idea of not nominating Supreme Court justices in an election year, and then, when given the very first opportunity, They did not hesitate to ignore their own arguments and nominate Amy Coney Barrett as quickly as possible. Democrats repeatedly try to be mature, work across the aisle, and turn the other cheek, but then act all shocked when we keep getting undermined. Republicans have repeatedly shown they have no issue being hypocritical, going back on their word, or using every loophole possible to push their agenda, to the point they have completely disregarded hundreds of years of checks and balances. It's time for Democrats to start responding in kind. Story 19. I am slightly to the left of Bernie in most things, but generally vote Democrat. However, I am frustrated with the constant hand-wringing over transgender issues and the focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion in everything. I want all people to be treated fairly and equally, but I am much more concerned about defeating Trump and the Republicans. Story 20. Of course, I rarely vote the same way twice and have never felt affiliated with a particular party. I usually vote for whichever local candidate makes the most sense for me and my community at the time of the election, so it's sometimes a question of choosing the lesser of several evils. Story 21. The political landscape has shifted. Following the old rules and surrendering will not accomplish anything now. Story 22. At a national level, this applies to both parties. The executive orders need to be curtailed. Congress needs to pass legislation efficiently to restore powers to the legislative branch. Presidential term limits were implemented within 10 years following a president who ignored the long-standing tradition of self-imposing a two-term limit. It is time for this action to be considered again regarding executive orders. Story 23. They believed the uninformed average voter would respond to policies and details about how to improve life. However, they actually respond more to promised actions that punish those they can be convinced cause problems. The party failed partly because it is influenced by the wealthy class, who often harbor negative sentiments toward minorities and the LGBTQ+ community, and they refuse to confront the elite for manipulating the economy to their advantage. Story 24. They insist on playing by the other side's rules and obstinately refuse to call out when the goalposts are shifted. They always think they will beat them at their own game somehow by shifting and adapting, while the people who voted for them just want them to do what they said they would do. It's maddening. Story 25. The left tends to claim marginalized groups of people based on their race or sexuality, regardless of whether they share the left's ideology, and is then shocked and frustrated when those groups do not vote in their favor. Story 26. They sound pretentious and seem disconnected from average people. They believe that being close to famous individuals will motivate us to vote for them, but in fact, it does the opposite. I would rather see a farmer or teacher than a celebrity on stage with a politician. Story 27. Too busy trying to impress each other with how innovative their beliefs are, no matter how absurd, and not focusing on practical, incremental improvements that will appeal to those outside the group. We cannot win the votes we have already won. Story 28. 30 to 40 years ago, my party was ready and willing to confront the Russians anywhere on the planet. Now, oh boy. Story 29. They put too much faith in moderate Republicans switching sides when it's clear that will never happen. There are millions of struggling people in this country who did not vote to cut their own benefits, and we could be courting them instead. They also failed to understand how serious the radicalization of young men and the overall atmosphere of disinformation online is. Story 30. They try to appeal to the voter's sense of decency, goodwill, and common sense. However, the way to win is to incite hatred, promise wealth, and lie as much as possible. Story 31. The transgender and multiple pronouns issue is a challenging topic. It's unfortunate that the Republicans were able to capitalize on it. I am uncertain how the party can recover from that criticism. They might consider shifting their focus to another progressive issue. Social issues tend to be easier talking points, as people often feel more comfortable sharing their opinions on them. However, I am not sure what new progressive issue they could highlight to attract attention. Story 32. Many Democrats do not appreciate what is good. Here is an example. If you asked many of the hardliners in our party if the United States did anything good in the world, they would have said no, that we just ruin everything. Yet when the United States Agency for International Development is canceled, they act like it was the best thing. Where was all the support for United States Agency for International Development before it was eliminated? Were we not doing positive things before? Did we ever discuss or promote it as something to be proud of? If you criticize everything the United States does internationally, you should not act wounded when all that support is cut. Another example is our significant progress on racial, gender, and sexual identity issues over the past 50 years. Of course, there is much further to go, but you would not know it from some of the conversation. You might think it was worse than ever. You might think the United States was the most racist, sexist, and hostile country towards the LGBTQ+ community in the world. None of that is true. If you cannot recognize progress, then further progress is pointless and a tough sell. I understand the criticism of United States foreign policy. I understand the frustration with the incredibly slow pace of progress in rights. But until recently, there was a lot to be proud of. However, we rarely talked as if that were the case. I believe that led a generation of Democrats to become increasingly militant and angry while things were improving, which makes them sound like endless complainers and turns a lot of people off. Story 33. They do not genuinely want to help people. They only pretend to do so as a marketing strategy to continue making money and expanding their empire. Story 34. They are inept except when it comes to enabling the mass slaughter of marginalized communities, but even then they appear to be sorrowful in front of the public. However, they hesitate to take action against a fascist coup in their own country. Now is the time for peace. Story 35. It is full of liars, racists, and bad people. If you even hint that you are part of it, you will be judged harshly. Story 36. The choice of whom to affiliate with is made entirely by those whose behaviors I would never align myself with. As for the others, they cannot do much wrong compared to the first group, and I find everything annoying. I admit everything. Story 37. I honestly cannot think of anything wrong or annoying about it, but that could just be a lack of understanding of how the proposed ideas and policies are supposed to work at a deeper level. As a Canadian, I am definitely excited to see how things unfold next month. It has been quite the roller coaster battle. Story 38. I am an independent, moderate, and unaffiliated person who is skeptical of our political parties and the divisive nature of politics. At the core of my skepticism is a desire for proof of meaningful changes, but this may also be a drawback. If I remain constantly skeptical, I may be more likely to criticize parties or politicians before considering any potential for change. In summary, excessive skepticism might make me less open to new ideas. Story 39. There was the whole issue with Bernie Sanders or the democratic process of choosing between one candidate. Story 40. They do not cater to the needs or concerns of ordinary working-class Americans, although they claim that they do. They are equally responsible for giving voice to the extreme ends of the political party as their counterparts are. Story 41. The lack of real fighting and organizing is evident, even though the public is primed and ready for effective organization. However, efforts continue to struggle against the opposition, and we are making little progress. Story 42. They are unwilling to take action against a dictator. When you need them the most, politicians like Schumer fail to support the people who elected them. New Yorkers, he may appear strong during election time, but if you vote him back into office, you will be responsible for the consequences. Story 43. Libertarian socialists lack a clear vision for constructing a post-capitalist or non-capitalist economy. Perhaps we are hesitant to engage in debate with tankies on this topic while we continue to strive for working-class support. Either way, the discussion remains unresolved. Story 44. We can downsize the federal government, give more control back to the states, and secure our borders from illegal immigration without trying to provoke others every step of the way. This is frustrating. The moment I saw Elon perform a controversial gesture, all I could think was, he is definitely going to provoke a reaction, but that was unnecessary. Story 45. My answer: everything with immigration and customs enforcement, and their actions resembling a police state going around kicking in people's doors without warrants, literally demanding to see identification, and detaining many lawful citizens with no criminal record, along with the silence from leadership, has left me questioning everything I believe politically. For clarification, I didn't even vote in this last election because I considered both Republican and Democratic candidates to be inadequate, but I generally lean more to the right. Story 46. They have no representation in rural areas. No one runs for local positions. Not for school boards, not for the city council, not for local judges, and not even for animal control. The state party, and especially the national party, does nothing to fund candidates in rural areas, which would allow younger people from rural backgrounds to move up to the national stage. They also do not maintain web pages endorsing candidates with whom they might align. They provide no support for candidates or grassroots organizations outside of larger towns and cities. Story 47. The right is alienating moderates. I believe that if they were a little less extreme in their aggressive approach to government efficiency efforts, they would have much more support. I understand their motivations, but I don't think moderates or especially liberals will get on board until we see undeniable results. Story 48. Anarchy only works when those who live under it do so in good faith. It can easily be ruined by individuals acting irresponsibly. Story 49. They are incredibly gullible, trend-following, and virtue-signaling. They will endorse terrorism with a billionaire's encouragement. Story 50. I donated once to a local politician who eventually became the mayor. Before that happened, she called me and asked about my policy wish list. I was excited to receive a call after making a modest donation, but I was also annoyed. Why does she care about policies that will never be implemented if she doesn't win first? Go and win more voters. That's the policy I care about the most, winning. I told her to focus on winning the election. No Democrat has won this area in decades. Just find a way to win. That's what I would like you to do with my donation. Democrats often have their heads in the clouds. I'm glad she won, but she almost didn't. Democrats in safe blue districts can afford to think about idealistic policy issues. Democrats in red districts should have only one concern: find a way to win so we can keep our schools, parks, and libraries from being shut down and sold off by Republicans. Story 51. Stand up for yourself. The Summer of Love Part 2 is coming. Everyone watched as individuals in Antifa confronted anyone wearing a red hat. Story 52. I don't have a party affiliation at this point because both parties are broken. However, what disgusts me about the left, with which I guess I align more closely, is that in 2 consecutive elections in 2016 and 2020, they had a candidate with a cohesive message that resonated with many people, Bernie Sanders. Instead of listening to their base and recognizing him as a galvanizing force, they leaned heavily on identity politics and essentially stole the nomination from him. Now we are left with opposition to the Republican Party that has no direction, conviction, or integrity. A decade later, Bernie is still the main voice in the party with substance behind his messaging. He could have garnered a substantial percentage of Republicans who see themselves as populist and want nothing to do with Trump. Story 53. I am effectively against Trump, but the left's response to everything after October 7th has been abhorrent. How can you dismiss those victims and demand that I show respect to the ones responsible for that atrocity? October 7th is to the left what January 6th is to the right. You are all disappointing. Story 54. People seem to take offense at the idea of registering as an independent, as if being someone who educates themselves about issues and votes irrespective of party politics is somehow bad. It is frustrating that many people who would otherwise be independent feel trapped by their political party, as though there are only 2 options. Story 55. The political left in the United States is overly concerned with propriety and adhering to polite and political norms. They continue to act as if it is business as usual, believing that checks and balances are functioning and that politicians on the right will eventually prioritize the common good again. They will not. They are addicted to power as an end in itself. I want Bernie Sanders and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, along with their supporters, to take over the Democratic Party, remove those who are influenced by corporate money or hesitant to create change, and actively fight back. Story 56. What is wrong is associating yourself with particular political parties. Form your own opinions. It's okay to have views from both parties. Story 57. I dislike that misandry and toxic positivity are all that the average person associates with Democrats today. The loudest individuals scream and cry in their echo chambers, becoming too scared and angry to engage in self-reflection. Meanwhile, the quieter, more meaningful voices remain silent because they fear being attacked if they merely suggest a compromise that doesn't involve dominance or superiority based on minority status, sexual orientation, or gender. Story 58. Before anyone engages with this misinformation, understand that you may be responding to a thread posted by Russia or China, who are seeking to further undermine American trust in its institutions and weaken the country. I understand that many are frustrated. The actions of certain political figures are concerning. People are worried because they feel there is no one to halt the current situation. However, that's not entirely accurate. The American legal system is working, and when we support those institutions and the politicians who defend them, we can emerge from this relatively intact. Not unscathed, but intact. What our adversaries, the same ones who created the environment that allowed certain individuals into the White House, want is another issue to distract us after this crisis. They aim to prevent us from regaining our stability. This affects every American and our allies, so we need to take this seriously and not engage with provocateurs online. Story 59. Democrats lack courage and have been accommodating extremists for too long. Republicans continue moving further to the right while successfully pushing Democrats to compromise, thereby shifting the Democratic Party to the right of center. There is no viable liberal party in the United States. There is only the center-right Democratic National Committee and the far-right Republican Party. Story 60. Not an exact answer, but it is continuously irritating to hear individuals describe liberalism as leftism, or to hear a liberal say, as someone on the left. Liberalism is not leftism. Liberalism has much more in common with conservatism and even fascism than it does with leftism. Story 61. Biden opened the border to such an extent that individuals going through the legal process were put on the back burner for a couple of years. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.